Filipas Bochanskis yra katalikų kunigas Jungtinėse Amerikos valstijose. Jis yra dirbęs religijos dėstytojų universitete, kontempliatyvių vienuolijų kapelionu, taip pat dvasios tėvu seminarijoje, o šiuo metu yra tarptautinės organizacijos Courage vadovas. Manau, jis pats papasakos apie šią organizaciją. Joje jis darbuojasi nuo 2009 metų. Ši organizacija buvo įkurta 1980 metais, taigi jau turime 40 metų trukmės patirtį. Courage International rūpinasi sielovada žmonių, kurie išgyvena potraukį tos pačios lyties asmenims, bet yra įsipareigoję gyventi skaisčiai. Šiuo metu kunigas Filipas yra taip pat Jungtinės Amerikos valstijų Katalikų Vyskupų Konferencijos konsultantas santuokos puoselėjimo, gynimo ir skatinimo klausimais. 2019 metais Popiežius Pranciškus apdovanojo kunigą Filipą specialiu ordinu, vadinamuoju Pro Ecclesia et Pontifice kryžiaus ordinu už ilgalaikę ir išskirtinę tarnystę bažnyčioje. Taigi su mumis žmogus turintis tikrai milžinišką sielovados patirtį, kurią sutiko pasidalinti su mumis. Taigi šiandien turbūt žinome, jog dėl ypatingos politinės situacijos Lietuvoje vyksta tokios požiūrių grumtynės, pozicijų gryninimas. O koksgi yra Katalikų Bažnyčios požiūris ir ne tik tiek, kokį konkrečiai sielovados pavidalą bažnyčia puoselėja atžvilgių žmonių išgyvenančių potraukį tos pačios lyties asmenims. Taigi, dear Father, personal question. What happened that you personally got involved with this ministry? Was that revelation or any event? What happened?
Well, thanks for asking that, because it's a story completely about God's plan and God's providence. This is not a ministry that, I was aware of this ministry when I was a seminarian. Actually, one of our professors was a chaplain for Courage at the time and had mentioned it to us. And the founder of Courage, Father John Harvey, had come to my seminary several times and spoke to my moral theology class. If I knew then what I know now, I would have paid a lot more attention and gotten to know him better. But it was not something that I knew was there, but I never requested or went looking to be involved. It was not kind of a big inspiration. What happened was that the chapter that was meeting in my home archdiocese of Philadelphia, their chaplain was a religious priest, a member of the Redemptorists, and he was moved to a different house and was not replaced by anyone. And so the priests that remained were not able to, they didn't have the time with all their other ministries to help. So one of the lay leaders of the group was a parishioner of mine and a friend. And so after a little while, he asked if I would be willing to help with the local chapter. And I have to say, I was unsure at first. I was a bit apprehensive. I didn't know what their stories would involve and what their situation would be like and what they would need from me or what I would be able to say. And so they said, well, just come and pray with us. You don't have to stay very long if you're not comfortable. We just want to get to know you. So I was able to do that. And over time, of course, I got to know the members of the group much better. And that sparked a desire in me to be more and more involved. Went to my archbishop and he gave me permission to be officially the chaplain. So I did that for about 5 years in my archdiocese. And then in the course of that, I got to know Father Paul Czech, who took over from Father Harvey in 2008. And in 2015, Father Czech invited me to come and work alongside him in our central administrative office. And then in 2017, I took over from him as executive director. So it's not a ministry that I ever thought I would have or went looking for, but it's probably the best decision I've made in at least throughout my priesthood, if not in my whole life, because being involved with this work and with the people whom we serve has transformed my priesthood. It has taught me what it means to be a spiritual father. It has taught me, just give me a new perspective on what a human heart can do when we cooperate with God's grace. And so it's formed me in many, many ways. And I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you. So can you help us to imagine a bit what exactly happens at Courage International? What are the victories? What are the challenges? And how does it look? How is it doing?
Yes, yeah. So that sounds like a question that my Archbishop asked me when I first spoke to him about it. He said, do we need a group like this? Don't we have enough help for people? And it's true, there are plenty of groups that meet in parishes for different segments of the Catholic population. So young adult groups and youth groups and new mothers and, retired persons and, the men's group that meets early in the morning after Mass. And each group is essentially the same, right? Pray together, talk about what's going on in life, support one another, encourage one another, speak from experience, form good friendships, and try to help others. And the Courage Group is very much like that. Our founding members back in 1980, they devised 5 goals that we would pursue together. First, to live chaste lives as the Church teaches. And then the other 4 goals support the first goal, to develop a life of prayer, to create an atmosphere where people can share their experience and learn from others, to form good chaste friendships, and to set good example for other people so that they can come to know the joy of living chastely as well. And so, we meet for about 90 minutes in our chapter meetings. We begin with prayer. We read the goals, and then each person is invited to check in, to just say, this is what's been happening since the last time we talked. Then we're able to respond to one another, to give some help and suggestions from experience. Then we have a more general discussion if there's time, and then we end with intercessory prayer. So very familiar to anybody who's ever been in a prayer group or a group for mutual support. The key to having a Courage group is that the things that one needs to talk about in terms of the experience of same-sex attraction are not always easy to talk about, and different cultures more so than others, right? And so, when a person comes to a Courage group, they know, well, everyone here has essentially an idea of what it is that I'm going through, and I don't have to explain it from the beginning every time, and I don't have to worry that someone will be shocked or disappointed in me. And so people are much more free to talk about all the different parts of our lives as disciples, because they're not self-conscious about, who knows about this part of their experience. So if you would name few things, like couple or maybe 3 things, what helps people with same-sex attraction to live chaste lives according to themselves? What is their testimony? Mm-hmm. Well, I think one thing that I've heard is, I think is very important, just to understand the teaching of the Church as something liberating, not something oppressive, right? And so there's a friend of mine who, when he was a teenager and a young adult, everyone told him, this is how God made you. You were born this way. This is what God wants. Now, don't be promiscuous, get a partner and settle down. But this is who you are. Just go and be happy. Right? And he realized in his own heart that he wasn't happy. And he said, because everyone had told him God made you this way, he felt much, much more unhappy, because he thought there must be something really wrong with me if I can't be happy doing what God made me to do. And so for him, when he heard, well, no, God doesn't give a person these attractions, that it's a result of any number of circumstances in a person's life, that God is calling us to chastity, to understand the need for complementarity, procreativity, everything about God's plan. When he realized that, he thought, that's why I'm not happy, because I'm looking in the wrong place what I need and what God is calling me to. And so for him, and for many others, I think, to just be able to say that clearly, this is what you're looking for in terms of being loved, being connected, being, all those things that God puts into our hearts. That is good, but the way that you're trying to find an answer to it is not. But we can entrust those needs to the Lord, and he'll show us a different way. And then I think, practically speaking, the ability to be accountable, to just say to friends, I'm struggling with this right now, and I just need some prayer, or I need to talk about what is triggering my temptations, or I just need to know that I'm not alone. So we have really good friendships that develop in a courage group. And oftentimes when someone is going through a personal struggle, they'll reach out to another member of the group for some support and encouragement. So that can be a very big help. Also, of course, the ability to receive the sacraments frequently. So we have time before and after each meeting to make the sacrament of confession available. And so, just that constant experience of God's mercy helps us to grow in our desire not to sin. I think that's 2 or 3 things. So there's lots more, of course, and it differs for each person. But I think the more that we live our lives in secret, the more the devil is able to really kind of corner us with temptations and convince us you're all alone. You'll never be better than this. This will always happen. So, just do what you want to do because you don't have any choice. And so just being able to speak honestly with people that are concerned for you, and to share that secret and to share that burden makes it a lot easier to face the lies that the devil tells, and to choose the truth.
So what you are telling us about sounds rather unique. The whole church approach to the whole issue is unique and very, very. It's very different from what is expected of the church. It's often church is seen as yet another political force or social force, which should pick sides, become rather or like conservative or liberal. And when church doesn't do that, it's called lukewarm or not radical enough or hesitant. But is this the case or not? In which sense church is radical?
Well, yeah, I think that this approach, this teaching, may seem unique today, but it's certainly always been God's plan for us, and always been the teaching of the church about chastity, and what that means for people who are not married, what it means in terms of sexual attraction. But you're right. I think it's much easier to just take a simple thing, which is usually at one extreme or the other, rather than to hold things kind of in paradox and see things more in a more, maybe it seems complex, but really just a more profound way. So the two extremes here are, well, if I feel this way, then it's terrible. I'm bad. I'm cast out. God doesn't love me. The church doesn't want me. Unfortunately, there are enough Christians who act like that, sometimes even to their own family members, and people who say, well, if someone is feeling this desire, then they're sinners, just feeling it, and there's no place for them in the church. That's one extreme. The other extreme is, well, if I feel this way, then it must be natural and it must be good, and no one should say anything to me except I'm very happy for you, and go do what you want. And there are people in society, for sure, and even people in the church who say, well, this is how God made you, and we really have nothing to say about the choices that you make. The reality that the church teaches is that we're very clear about the nature of sexual relations, right? That what we do with our bodies speaks a language of its own, and it signifies what's going on with our souls, so that every sexual act has to be between spouses who are permanently committed to each other, who are a man and a woman, and whose relations are open to having children, because that context of permanence, faithfulness, complementarity, procreativity, that makes human love an image of God's love. And when something's missing from that, then it's a different thing. It's not what God desires. And so the church is very clear that because all homosexual intimate actions are going to, by definition, not be complementary and not be open to procreation, that there's never a case where we can say that the action is good. And at the same time, a person who desires that, spontaneously, doesn't choose to feel that way and would, in most cases, I think, would just rather feel like everybody else feels. A person is not a sinner for feeling a desire. Right? We have to make good choices about actions, but no one is to be excluded or marginalized or made to feel unwelcome, much less rejected by God or by the church or by families or anyone, simply for having that experience in their life, simply for feeling the desire. So that's where it gets kind of paradoxical. That and I think we use the expression, at least in the United States, to hate the sin and love the sinner, right? I think we need to be just a little more gentle in how we say that. We have to love the person and see the person for who he or she is, and let the person tell his or her own story and understand what this experience means in that person's life. Because it's easy to assume, well, if you say that you feel this way, I know exactly what that means and exactly what you want and exactly what you're doing. And that's hardly ever the case. So, we have to get to know the person as a person, meet them starting from their situation, tell them the truth about the choices that we believe God wants us each to make, but also stay with them as they try to understand and embrace that. So it's a bit more, it takes a lot more commitment and a lot more time and a lot more understanding than to do that, rather than to just go to one extreme or the other, either total rejection or total acceptance and saying nothing.
Father Philip, you sometimes mention that people with same-sex attraction often can relate their attraction to childhood wounds, unmet emotional needs, dysfunctional families, emotional abuses, and so on. And if this really is the case, how would you talk about this with teenagers and young adults, that those with same-sex attraction, they wouldn't feel alienated from their peers, or they wouldn't start blaming their parents or even going into conflict with them?
Well, I think it's important to clarify a few things to begin. So in the Catechism, I think it's paragraph 2358, the Church acknowledges that many people who experience same-sex attractions experience it as a burden or a difficulty, that it can be a difficult situation for them, which is why we always have to receive the person with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. But it goes on to say that the psychological origins of homosexuality are not completely explained, right? And so I think that's all that the Church is going to say, that its origins remain largely unexplained, because the Church is not made up of psychologists. Well, I mean, there are psychologists who are in the Church, surely, but the Church's job is not to do psychology or sociology, but to proclaim the gospel and to apply it to concrete situations. So I think both officially, if you will, from the point of view of the Church as the Church, but also personally from my own experience, I think we ought to say there's not a one-size-fits-all explanation. There's not one story that explains everything for every person. And I think we can do a lot of harm to a person's understanding of themselves and of our desire to accompany them if we start with that and say, well, listen, your problem must be that this happened or that didn't happen, or have a checklist and say, let's just figure out which one of these scenarios applies in your life. Human beings are much more complex than that. And And oftentimes, it's not so much a situation that happened as a person's interpretation of it, or their perception of someone else's motives or words or whatever. So it's not ever as easy as to say, if you're feeling these attractions, you must have had these experiences. So to answer your question, I think, to help younger people and hear the church's message, we have to be very careful about making that clear, that we're not saying that, this is coming from a place of blame or of fault. It's not anybody's choice. That, and it's really, I think, not as important where it comes from as where a person wants to go with it in their life. Now, as I talk to more and more people, obviously there are things that come up. And in many cases, there are similar wounds to what everyone in our culture in the modern world experiences. Questions about self-image, difficulties in our relationships with family and friends. Like, this is not unique to someone who experiences same-sex attraction. Everyone is wounded at least by the original sin and by all sorts of other situations. And so I think we have to be attentive to the needs of the heart and to where people may be suffering, and be able to support them and encourage them. If someone wants to seek help from a therapist or a psychologist, we certainly respect that and encourage that. But I would not recommend that someone go to a psychologist to fix or get rid of their same-sex attractions, right? The time to go and talk to someone is when there are issues of hurt or anger or resentment or fear, or anxiety, or any of those other things that are so common in people's hearts and minds today. And oftentimes when we're talking about those deep issues, we find that, well, I don't really feel so triggered or tempted in terms of sexuality and chastity, because I'm finding better answers, and I'm able to really get to feel good and secure and confident in my relationships and myself. I feel like I'm rambled off the topic a little bit there, but yeah, the point is that there's not one story for everyone, and if we respect that and let someone meet someone and starting from their situation and let him or her tell their own story, then it goes a long way to showing respect.
Now, so far we are talking about mostly people who are involved with courage ministry, or they want to keep in relationship with church. They don't want to leave church. But I'm sure you often also get notices from people who have no relationship with church, or have hostile to church, and usually they like saying, what is your business if two homosexual people are happy together? So just why is it bad thing, or why do you have any say about it at all? Leave it alone. So what would be your answer, or what is your reaction? How, or is it any possible to turn this situation into a dialogue, or maybe something positive?
Yeah. So I think first of all, I've been a priest for 22 years, and I was, unofficially celibate for all the years before that, right? And there are difficult days, trying to live a chaste life, but on the whole, it's a very freeing, very joyful thing. And chastity, according to our state in life, is a call for every single one of us. Priests, religious, married people have to be chaste in their relationship with one another. So I think the first thing to say is I have found that striving to live a chaste life, in my case, a celibate life, has really been beneficial to me in many ways in understanding myself and relating to others. And so if I love someone and I think that something is good, I'd like to share that with them. Now, they may not be interested, and that's fine. But, it's certainly an act of charity to say, hey, I figured out something that really is good for me. I think it might be good for you as well. So I think at the heart of things, the church just speaks this message to every person. The other thing is, our perspective as Catholics reminds us that our happiness is much more than pleasure, right? That there are lots of things that are pleasurable to do or to experience that will make us unhappy in the long run. And also that our happiness is not just about this life, but the next life, eternal life. And the reality is that to depart from God's plan for anything, and to depart from properly ordered sexuality, it's grave sin. If we're aware of that, we do it freely. It's a grave sin which separates us from the life of grace. The church teaches that to exclude procreation or complementarity, to separate the two aspects of intimacy, has a serious effect on the spiritual life of both people. The context that God has for sexuality is meant to make us more generous people, to make us people who are focused on the other. The Catechism says that marriage helps to overcome the self-absorption that is a result of original sin, right? And so, chastity, well, in marriage and in other parts of life, chastity is a remedy for sin. It's a call to generosity. It's a call to self-gift. And as you heard in the presentation that I gave, it's only in making a gift of ourselves that we know who we are, that we become our true self. So I think people who are in same-sex relationships, who are intimate with others, certainly it's a pleasurable thing. I think it's very clear that there's love there of a sort, but if we can perceive that it's not the right context in which to express erotic love, passion, that love that wants to be physically as well as spiritually united, then we ought to say to someone, I know that you have good intentions, that you're looking for love and to give and receive love. I know that this is meaningful to you, but there's more to sex than this. There's more to marriage and relationships than this. And if you settle for less than what those things are meant for, then ultimately it will make you unhappy.
Thank you very much.
People don't always take our word for it, but we try to make that as attractive as possible, to stay cheerful and clear. And the truth is attractive in itself.
Thanks a lot. Now we are getting close to Q&A from our participants. And before that, I want to ask two last questions that our participants asked a few times. So probably these questions reflect much Lithuanian context. How about political environment? We are right now in the midst of some political tensions about legislations related to so-called LGBT topics and education in school on these topics. And very often the church is criticized for any say in this. For example, someone would say, like, has the church the right to impose Christian morality about homosexuality to all the citizens of Lithuania? And on the other hand, so what's your position? What's your position? We as the good Catholics, or like pastoral workers, should we get involved? How much and in what way? Or what's the right method to communicate?
Sure. Well, I think first of all, to understand that something is not true because the church teaches it. The church teaches it because it's true. And it was true in the Garden of Eden, and it will be true on the last day. And it is true in areas where they have not heard of Jesus Christ, right? The truth is itself, it exists. And so the God's plan for sexuality and marriage and intimacy is written into the human body and human heart. and predates even the incarnation, right? And so for the church to say, we think that you should pay attention to our perspective on this, is not the church saying, well, we've made this up and our own people seem to like it, so we think everyone else should have to do it. What the church is saying is, I think we see something fundamental about humanity here that maybe other people are missing, and we'd like you to consider this when you consider how to treat human beings, right? And so, the church's message, especially about human life and human sexuality, is really goes. It's not just an expectation for Catholics. It's a description of what we perceive the world actually to be like. And then it's not the position, the role of bishops and the priests and deacons who assist them, and the religious as well, is to teach, primarily by example, and then by preaching and by guidance and governance. The role of the lay faithful is to build the kingdom of God in the world, right? And so I think it's very clear in, for example, the Constitution Lumen Gentium on the church, and the decree from Vatican II about the apostolate of the laity, in what St. John Paul has written in Christi Fidelis Laici and other documents. It's very clear that the lay faithful have a secular vocation, which is to transform the world from within. And so when there is a representative government, good people of conscience, including Catholics, should be full participants, even as candidates, if they have the nerve to go through campaigns and all the trials of the other side. But to be in a position to use one's conscience to make good decisions about what's true and good for each person and for all people in the society. So yes, lay people should very much get involved and vote according to their conscience, which is formed, yes, by the teaching of the church, and also by their application of that teaching to concrete situations. I think we have to remember too, that the world and the church come from different places. Politics is about power, and the church's vocation is to love, right? So if one's goal is to accumulate and to hold on to power, then that means destroying anything that is an obstacle to that, right? So the diabolical plan is always divide and conquer, right? And oftentimes a political party or individual, they benefit when they can divide and conquer. Right? And so we shouldn't be surprised that secular politics wants to destroy the family, because that is the strongest unit in society. If you destroy the family, then you replace the family as the basic unit of society with the individual. And an individual knows that he or she is weak and not self-sufficient. And so they look for someone to support and guide them. And if you've destroyed the family, you've destroyed schools, you've destroyed communities, well, what's left except the government? And if people depend on the government for their rights and security, then they tend to vote to keep the same people in power, because those people tell them if the other people get in power, then you lose all that. Okay? And so politics in the world is looking for power. The church has to be first and foremost about love, which means choosing the good of each individual, and to choose the common good, right? Which means strengthening family first and foremost, strengthening community, strengthening parish life, strengthening the life of the nation, strengthening the solidarity among nations, right? That all of that, the more networks of love that we are connected with, the more we're able to love as we should and make a gift of self. And family, above all, is a school of love. So the church's role should always be to support family life, to encourage people to the vocation of marriage, as well as to vocations to ministry, and to speak clearly about love and sexuality and intimacy and relationships, which are so much at the heart of family life.
And so the last question is also about tensions and divisions. What about the tensions and divisions in the church? Like recent events when many Catholics were enjoying when Vatican and the Pope declared that priests cannot bless same-sex unions. And then there were other Catholics who were very unhappy, and even priests stirring up the petitions to Pope. And so it's very easy to get angry and dissatisfied, unsettled, and lose the point. What would you say about that?
Well, I don't know if this will be very satisfying, but it's always been like that, right? And it happens more when the clergy forget that their role is to serve and to love and not to be in power, right? So think of the day that James and John and their mother came to Jesus and said, we want you to promise us that we'll sit at your right and your left when you come into your kingdom, right? For them, it was power. For the Lord, it was suffering and service, right? But what happened? The other 10 got indignant at James and John because they perceived, that they were going after power and status. And so it's interesting in the Gospels, the Lord has to keep gathering the disciples together. He talks about the cross to them and they all kind of disappear. And then James and John come, and then the rest of them are angry and don't want to talk to James and John. And then he has to gather them again so he can talk to them about being a servant and being united with one another. So we have to recognize, I think, that if what we're looking for is to win points over somebody else, or to be the person who is quoted or famous, or any other kind of expression of that, then we're going to, that becomes a huge obstacle to doing the Lord's will. And so the prayer of the Lord at the Last Supper was that the apostles, first and foremost, would be one with him and one with each other. And he says, that they may be one, that the world may believe that you sent me. And so disunity among the clergy is one of the greatest scandals. And it makes it more difficult for the lay members and religious members of the church, as well as just people in the world, to hear the church's message if the church's leaders are disunited. Now, the teaching of the church on this is very clear and very clearly expressed, and really not, to my understanding, not open for debate. In the Catechism, it says, the paragraph that talks about the fact that homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered and in no circumstances can they be approved. It says first that this teaching is based on sacred scripture and consistently taught by sacred tradition, right? And that's a very particular way of framing a teaching. It doesn't appear very often in the Catechism like that. But what that's saying is, because it's a teaching on faith and morals that comes from scripture, it's divinely revealed, and has always been taught by sacred tradition. What that means is that it's an infallible expression of a teaching by the ordinary universal magisterium, right? And so it's not a socially conditioned or political or teaching. It's not something confined to one time or place, and it's not a teaching that can change. And I think that we have to acknowledge, every priest or bishop, when he was ordained a deacon, and then again before he was ordained a priest, and then again before he was ordained a bishop, and then again before he took on his office of cardinal, at each stage, a cleric makes an oath of fidelity and says that in regard to these teachings that are infallibly presented by the magisterium, I will firmly embrace it and teach others to do so. And whatever doctrines are opposed to it, I will shun. Right? And so if anyone were to say, especially a bishop or even a cardinal were to say that this teaching of the church on the nature of same-sex intimacy can change or is about to change or ought to change, frankly, I don't think that cleric is being faithful to the oath of fidelity that he made when he was ordained.
Well,
and so if we were to keep that oath, then we'll have more unity, I think.
Thanks a lot.